welcome to the library. Every now and then we have a really special night here, and you're here for one tonight. But before we get started with that, I do need to remind you, if you haven't yet, please take out your cell phones, take a moment to silence those after you're done texting, following the instructions that you need. I also have just a couple of quick announcements about some other programming here at the library. The final author event of 2019 will be Bruce Gibney, who will be here on October 29th to talk with us about his book, The Nonsense Factory. It's a critical examination of the American legal system in which he sets out his case that every aspect of our legal system, from law schools to the presidency, is in crisis, and I know you won't want to miss that pick-me-up. For families, we have two events coming up that I want to make sure you're aware of. On Saturday, October 26th, our Southwest Regional Library will host a preschool carnival. It'll have entertainment from Cirque Louis and an appearance by Pete the Cat, and there will be free books. Then on Saturday, October 9th, Pete the Cat, right? And then on Saturday, October 9th, our South Central Regional Library will host our annual Family STEAM Day. There'll be lots of fun and educational activities. Last year, the indoor planetarium, which the line was so long, I didn't even get to see it, and the make your own concrete activities were very popular. And kids love to make concrete. You can find more information on those and other events on our website. Somebody said I did. So our guest tonight, Ann Patchett, is the author of 8 novels, including the recently published title, The Dutch House. She's also written 3 books of nonfiction, and in 2019, she published her first children's book. I recently read her first novel, The Patron Saint of Liars. It's a stunningly beautiful tale that explores themes of love and commitment and penance and grace. And I don't want to give you any spoilers, but if you haven't read it, you need to go get that one. An alumna of Sarah Lawrence College in the Iowa Writers Workshop. She's been the recipient of awards including the Ben Faulkner Award, the American Booksellers Association's Most Engaging Author Award, and her work has been translated into more than 30 languages. As if that weren't enough, in 2011, she and a business partner opened Parnassus Books in Nashville, and she has become a leading advocate for books in bookstores. And in 2012, she was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And everybody who's been named one of the 100 most Ann Patchett lives in Nashville with her husband, Carl Vandevender, and their dog, Sparky, who is very cute. We are thrilled to partner with Carmichael's Bookstore. Thank you so much for letting us host this event here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Ann Patchett.
Let me tell you why you should donate to your library. Because chances are everybody here can afford to buy a book. So the reason that you donate to your library is so that people who cannot afford to buy a book can have access to books. And that's how we help your community. I like to make my pitch for libraries when I'm in one. For some reason this tour I've been in libraries, synagogues, and churches, so I have a different pitch for all 3. I'm going to do something a little different tonight, and that is I'm going to make a talk about, not about the Dutch House, but kind of around the Dutch House. The reason is that there are a lot of spoilers in this book, and I don't want to wreck it for you. If you've read any of the reviews, it probably has already been wrecked for you. But I'm going to make an attempt to not wreck it any further. The other thing that I want to do is talk about a phenomenon in author touring. Obviously, I own a bookstore, so I know a lot about this. When I was a young author coming up, and I would have a book come out, what authors would do is we would go to the bookstore and we would read for a little while, and then we would talk, and then we would answer questions and sign books. Those days are over. Now, what authors do when they're on tour is they want to be interviewed, because everyone wants to feel that they are on the Dick Cavett Show. And it is, let me tell you, as an author, it is the loveliest thing in the world to be interviewed. It's just, It's easy, it's relaxing, nothing is your responsibility. If the person who's interviewing you is awful, it doesn't matter because people will walk out of there saying, that interviewer was awful. They won't say that the author was awful. You don't have to prepare, it's super. But if you are the person who is interviewing the author, it is a huge amount of work. So I'm going to tell you two things that are in direct conflict with one another, and they are both true. If you're the person who is interviewing the author, you have to read the book usually twice. You've got to read the backlist. You've got to make up a list of questions. You've got to put on a dress. You've got to brush your hair. You've got to show up and be smart. And it's a little bit like if you've ever made a huge dinner that took you 4 or 5 hours to cook and your family comes in and they eat it in 15 minutes and they say, that was great. And then that's it. That is a little bit what it's like to interview somebody. It's a huge amount of work, and there's not an enormous amount of return. Now, since I am the co-owner of Parnassus Books, I have 3 jobs. I'm a writer, I'm a bookseller, and now I am a famous author interviewer. Because there are a ton of people who will only come to the store on the condition that Ann Patchett will interview them. So I'm constantly doing this huge amount of work and preparation, and so I'm complaining about it, right? I don't want to do it anymore. But on the other hand, it is equally true that it is a magnificent opportunity to think deeply about people's work, to meet interesting people, to get to talk to them. So I'm simultaneously very lucky and very unlucky that I have to do all of this. But what I knew when I was putting this tour together with my publicist, and I'm going to 31 cities, and I imagined my publicist calling 31 bookstores and saying, find 31 people to interview Ann Patchett on stage, and those 31 people having to spend days and days doing the work to put the program together. I just didn't want to do that. You can either be part of the solution or you can be part of the problem. And I am choosing to be part of the solution. So that's the other reason that I'm doing this talk. The third reason that I am doing this talk is that I am doing what I always want to do more than anything, which is recommend books and talk about books. So don't get your phone out. Don't go for a piece of paper. When I'm done, you can go to my website, annpatchett.com, and there is going to be a little link that says book list. So every book I mentioned tonight is going to be listed on the book list. If you decide you are interested in reading any of those books, please do not order them from Amazon, and do not order them from Parnassus. Order them from Carmichael's. Trafficking people to Parnassus, which I'm not. All right, so we're going to start out, and I'm going to tell you some stories about some of the amazing people that I have interviewed. Because I am such a famous author interviewer that I not only interview people at Parnassus, I am now asked to go to bigger cities all the time to interview other famous people, more famous authors. And we've been open for almost 8 years. So one of the first people that I interviewed after we opened was J.K. Rowling. When she was on her book tour for Casual Vacancy, she did one stop in America, and it was at Lincoln Center, and I was interviewing her. So one stop for J.K. Rowling, 31 stops for Ann Patchett. One of us is a little smarter than the other one of us. One of the wonderful things about interviewing people is that you get to read the book before anyone else. So when I was asked to interview her, a human being who worked at Little Brown in New York City flew the manuscript, just a chunk of paper, to Nashville, came to my house, made me sign all of these waivers and non-disclosure forms, left the book for me, and 3 days later flew back from New York to pick up the manuscript because, of course, everyone knows we don't have Xerox machines in Tennessee. And you probably don't have them in Kentucky either. So what was so great about this experience is I loved this book passionately. I read this book almost 8 years ago, and probably a week hasn't gone by that I haven't thought of it. The book got horrible reviews. Practically no one read it. The people that I talked to who did said, oh, I started it, I didn't like it, I didn't finish it, which I think had to do with reviews, which had to do with the fact that Harry Potter had always gotten great reviews, and everybody at the New York Times had been sharpening their knives all of those years, waiting to give Jo Rowling a really bad review. And this was an amazing book, and that is why she then went on to publish under a pseudonym, which nobody knew about until her lawyer's wife told her girlfriend that Robert Galbraith was actually J.K. Rowling. One of the great things about interviewing people is you get to set the tone of the evening. This is an amazing memoir, which oh, and by the way, if you think I'm a Pollyanna because I keep saying, I love this book, I love this book, I love this person, I've interviewed well over 100 people. I'm talking about very few of them tonight. So, this is a terrific book. It's very serious. It is a memoir about Roxane Gay, by Roxane Gay, she was raped as a child and then dealt with a problem of enormous obesity all throughout her life afterwards, and people's judgment about her weight and not understanding it. And I'm going to interview her, and this is serious. And it's a big auditorium at Vanderbilt, and it is packed with people who are there for a very important, serious downer of an evening. And I sit down with Roxane Gay, and the first thing I said to her was, so, I hear you're really into HGTV. It was like the best moment of my interview life because she was so happy. Every single night she is going on book tour and having to answer questions about being raped and being obese. And we talked about tiny houses and the Property Brothers. And we talked about the book too, but everybody in the audience was like cheering. They were so excited, and she was magnificent. Michael Chabon, one of my very favorite authors and one of my favorite people to interview, and I like to put this in because often people think that people who are famous and who have won the Pulitzers are probably snobs, and Michael Chabon is the nicest guy in the world, and this was a terrific book. Another book by a really nice guy, Tom Hanks. The reason that I interviewed Tom Hanks is a funny story. So, probably every book that gets published in this country is sent to my house or to my bookstore. Sometimes I get up to 5 copies of one book. Everybody wants me to read the book that's coming out. They want me to blurb it, they want me to review it, they want me to interview the author, they want me to dust it with fairy dust, whatever. I probably had 5 copies of this book in my office, and I thought, I'm not going to read a book of short stories by a movie star. That's crazy. Why would I do that? But one night, at 9 o'clock at night, I had finished the novel that I was reading. I wanted to read just a little bit more before I went to bed. I went into my office, I was looking for something, what do I want to read next? I thought, oh, I'll pick this up, it's short stories, and it was fantastic. It's an amazing book. They're exactly the short stories you would think Tom Hanks would write. They are old-fashioned, they are incredibly well-crafted, they are smart and entertaining, and I loved it. So I blurbed the book, which means I wrote the little quote on the back. And a month later, I get a call from his publisher, and they said, would you come to Washington and interview Tom on stage? And I said, I don't know. What would be in it for me? So I said, what do you want? And I said, well, what I want is 600 signed first editions of Uncommon Type. Because at Parnassus, we have a first editions club. I got these books from J.K. Rowling too, and so then I can send them out to my subscribers. I had a fantastic time. When Tom Hanks and I were going on stage, he said to the person who was organizing the event, how long can we stay on stage? And they said, oh, you know, these programs last an hour. And he said, yeah, but what if we're having fun and we don't want to get off stage? And she said, you can stay on stage as long as you want. We stayed on stage for 2.5 hours. That was the best ticket anybody ever bought in DC. Okay, the person who changed my life as an interviewer was Alda, who wrote the absolutely terribly titled book, If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? But it is a terrific book, And as you know, Alan for years had a show on Nova about science, and which he interviewed scientists. And he tells the story in the book and while we were on stage about the fact that he is such a prepared AAA student that he would do all of his research and write all of his questions on note cards, and then he would go and he would interview the scientist, and he would ask his first important question, and the scientist would answer, talk, whatever. And then he would ask his next important question, and the scientist would answer, wait. And then he would ask his next question, and then he realized very early on that he was a terrible interviewer because he wasn't listening, because he wasn't present. And this is really a problem. When I've done this all the time. If you're prepared and you have your note cards and your questions, you're not thinking about what the person is saying. You're waiting until you can ask your next question. And you're kind of very discreetly trying to go through your note cards to get to the next question. And he says, what you've got to do to be a good interviewer is do all of your research, write your questions, throw them away, and come on stage with nothing, so that you can really be emotionally present. And so ever since I interviewed Alan Alda, I have interviewed people with what I call the Alda method. And it means that it's 10 times more work because you're really flying without a net, and it's scary, and it takes enormous preparation and concentration, but it makes for a much better interview. I like to put this book in because I love it, and as you know, Mary Norris is the copy editor of the New Yorker magazine, and she wrote a terrific book called Between You and Me, Confessions of a Comma Queen. This is the follow-up, Greek to Me, and it is about her memoir of deciding in the middle of her life that she was going to learn ancient Greek. Now, Louisville, as I'm sure you all know, in Nashville, we have the Parthenon in the middle of our city, a full-scale replica of the Parthenon with Athena, a gold-leafed statue that is the largest indoor statue in the world. I interviewed Mary Norris about learning Greek in the Parthenon at the feet of Athena, and she cried through the whole interview, and it wasn't a good interview. Okay, so sometimes, I do love the book there, sometimes a person wants an interviewer on stage, but they don't need you there. In the same way that they keep a little goat in the stall with the racehorse just to keep them calm. Thus was the case with Reese Witherspoon. So Reese Witherspoon owns a dress shop in Nashville called Draper James. I interviewed her at the Symphony Hall, 2,800 seats. Every single woman, and I do mean to tell you, there were only women there, every single one of them was wearing a dress from Draper James. And all I had to do was put on a very fancy dress. They actually offered me a dress from Draper James, and I was like, I can't do that. I can't like brand you and interview you at the same time. But I wore a fancy dress and high heels, and I sat down on stage with Reese Witherspoon, and I said, "Hey Reese, we're just so glad you all come back to Nashville." And that was all I said. And she was magnificent, and she talked for an hour, and she's from there, and everybody, like, half the audience were her cousins. They had a great time. It was wonderful. Ruth Reichel, I probably interviewed her 4 times. This is her memoir about her years at Gourmet Magazine when she was the editor. I wrote for Gourmet Magazine when Ruth was there for 10 years. I'm actually in the book, so I especially like to give this one a plug. Melinda Gates. This is very interesting. All right, friends. Raise your hand. How many people have read this book? Okay, Louisville, you're a little better than most cities. You're like 5. This is exactly the kind of book I never would have read. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's a matter of when it's this kind of a nonfiction book and you read about it in the paper and you hear her on television, you hear her on the radio, you sort of feel like you've read the book without reading it. But her people called the bookstore and they said, if Anne will agree to interview Melinda Gates, she will come to Nashville. Why does Melinda Gates care whether or not I interview her? Because on Bill and Melinda's last wedding anniversary, they read my book, This is the Story of a Happy Marriage, out loud to each other. Okay? Yeah, I'll interview Melinda Gates. So I read the book and I got so much out of it. Melinda Gates is Joan of Arc, basically. And what the Gates Foundation is doing, you may think you know what they're doing. Trouble yourself to read the book. It is so well done. And today, while I was driving from Lexington to Louisville, I listened to Alda's podcast. He has a podcast called Clear and Vivid, and he interviews Melinda Gates for the podcast. All right, this is also another great story. So Alan has been following Melinda Gates' tour schedule. He sees on her tour schedule that I'm interviewing her. He calls me and says, I'm sorry to bother you, I really need a favor. Do you think that you could get Melinda Gates to do my podcast? Is there any better feeling in the whole world than having Alan Alda ask you a favor? So the second I meet Melinda Gates, I'm like, hey, I have a friend who needs a favor. Could you just sort of do this for me personally? And she did. And so if you listen to Alan Alda interview Melinda Gates, not only will you want to read both of their books, but you can see the Alda method at work. Now, perhaps you would like to know who my all-time favorite person to interview was, because you will not guess. You ready? Harlan Coben, right? Okay, so Harlan Coben had written 31 books. I had not read any of them. The reason is I just don't read thrillers. It's just not my thing. I did read this book, and I enjoyed it very much. It was thrilling. I read it in a day. It was great. This is the kind of interview that I would turn down. Because I do turn people down, and because I just think there's no way I can read your backlist. I can't possibly interview Harlan Coben. But the reason that I said that I would do it is because I dated not one, but two guys who lived on Harlan Coben's hall freshman year at Amherst. And yet, I had never dated Harlan Coben. And I thought, I'm interested. So he came. He is the loveliest guy. You know when they say a person is easy in their skin? He is easy in his skin. He is smart, he's confident, he's funny, he's just relaxed. And he has the thing that makes a person fun to interview. Harlan Coben has volley. And what that means is when I ask him a question, he turns it around. So when I said, Harlan, that scene in the book in which the hero is tasered with a cattle prod, how did you do the research for that? And he said, oh, I made that up. But the scene in Commonwealth, where she drops out of law school, how did you figure out how much it was going to? I was like, oh, I love you so much more than those two guys that I dated on your own. I should have dated Harlan Coben. Okay, so that's a brief overview of my life as a famous author interviewer. Now, I'm going to tell you some stories about writing novels. The way I work as a novelist is I have an idea, and often something that I'm working on in a book carries on for 1 or 2 or 3 books. For example, in my novel Run, there is a character who is an ichthyologist, and the study of fish. And I enjoyed writing about evolutionary biology and reading about it so much that I thought, okay, in my next book, I want to write about nothing but scientists, and that was State of Wonder. So things move from book to book. In Run, the siblings are adopted, and I was really interested in their relationship with one another. So in Commonwealth, I decided to write about step-families and see what the step-family children and how they related to one another. The other thing that I did, and in Commonwealth with the stepchildren, the relationship that I enjoyed the most of all of those people was between one stepbrother and stepsister. And so I thought in the next book that I write, I want to write about a brother and a sister. So also in my books, I'm very interested in time, and I think probably all novelists are obsessed with time. But time had been very constricted in my books. So Bel Canto takes place over 3 months, State of Wonder takes place over 3 weeks, Run takes place in 24 hours. And I know that I needed to stretch back out, back to Patron Saint of Liars, which I can't remember, but I think it takes place over 12 years or something like that. I wanted to stretch out again. So Commonwealth takes place over 4 decades. Now, going forward into my next book, I knew 2 things. I wanted to write about a brother and a sister, and I wanted to write a timeline that took place over at least 4 decades, because I really enjoyed working in that larger span of time. This book comes out in September of 2016. When I'm done with book tour, I go home, I immediately start interviewing people again, and the first person I interview is Zadie Smith. Now, I have never been intimidated about interviewing anybody except Zadie Smith. This is a couple of reasons. One, I am a huge Zadie Smith fan. I adore her work. But Zadie Smith is famously brilliant. People talk about it, everybody knows it. If you've read her books, if you read an interview, if you read a short story, it just sort of steams off the page how smart she is. Plus she's incredibly beautiful and she's British, and I don't know, it was intimidating. It turns out she was wonderful. She's very, very warm. She is every bit as scorching smart as people say she is. And we got on stage with the Alda method, and we just locked down, and we were talking, really talking in front of 2,000 people, and it was fantastic. And Zadie Smith said something that just changed my life. So I said to her, Commonwealth was largely received as an autobiographical novel, and in many ways it is an autobiographical novel. Swing Time also received as an autobiographical novel. So I'm wondering, the mother in this novel is Jamaican, your mother's Jamaican, father in this novel is Caucasian British, your father is British, the family lives in the same suburb outside of London where you grow up, the main character wants to be a dancer, you want to be a dancer, so is this an autobiographical novel? And Zadie Smith said to me, and I actually called Zadie Smith and said, did I get this right? And she was like, yes, you did. She says to me, it is an autobiographical novel, but I'm not the daughter, I'm the mother. And I'm not the mother in real life that I am in this novel. The mother in this novel is the mother that I am afraid of being with my own children. She said, autobiographical fiction does not have to be about the things that happen to you. Autobiographical fiction can be what we're afraid of and what we desire. And when you think about that, what we're afraid of and what we desire takes up a lot more space in our brain on any given day than what actually has happened to us. I wish somebody had told me this 20 years ago. I mean, it's one of those things that as soon as she said it, I was like, of course, that's exactly right. I could never explain how something felt autobiographical, even though it had no aspect of it had ever happened. And while I am sitting on stage with Zadie Smith, I know the third element of the novel I want to write next. And that is, I want to write a book about being a really bad stepmother. Because that was the thing I was most afraid of being. In my family, on both sides, for every generation, as far back as anyone has recorded, we have divorced in my family. That is what we do. We marry people, we divorce them, we marry other people, and then we step-parent their children. So, everybody in my family has been a step-parent, some of them good, some of them bad. But when I first met my stepchildren 25 years ago, I was terrified of doing wrong by them. I was terrified of letting them down, way before they were my stepchildren. I mean, they're in their 40s now, we've done very well, I love them, they love me, it's been really good. And this is not an active fear, but it was such a huge fear a long time ago. And so now I know, sitting on stage with Zadie Smith, 3 things about my novel. It's going to be a brother and a sister. It's going to take place over more than 4 decades, and there's going to be a bad stepmother. But this is happening in November of 2016, so there's something else going on in the world. And I'm going to leave this slide up there for 1 second. So, in the Kardashian world, no one's going to be offended, I promise you. In the Kardashian world in which we lived, I felt there was an enormous celebration of wealth. And the idea that nothing could be better, nothing could make you more of a winner than to be the absolutely richest person. And I wanted to write a character who chose to walk away from wealth because it wasn't who she was. That's impossible to me, that people could choose to not aspire to be blindingly rich. Now there are 4 things going on in this book: a brother and a sister, 40 years, a bad stepmother, and a woman who walks away from wealth. And now I know what the novel I'm going to write next is about. And 2017 begins, and I am home, and I am writing, and I am completely happy. Now, at Parnassus Books, every single day, opportunity walks through the door. And on January 2nd of 2018, opportunity came in the form of Robin Price Glasser, the illustrator for the Fancy Nancy series. Fancy Nancy is a juggernaut, 80 books of Fancy Nancy. This is the last one. Fancy Nancy, Oodles of Kittens. Which just makes me so happy, I could say that all day long. And Robin Price Glasser and Jane O'Connor, the author, they've just sold the franchise to Disney. If you go to Disneyland this week, you can have your picture taken with Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Fancy Nancy. And there are going to be no more Fancy Nancy books, which is fine. There are 80 of them. We have enough. So Robin Price Glasser says to me, I would like you to write a picture book for me to illustrate because I'm starting over again and I'm looking for a new series. And I say, no. I don't know how to write a picture book. I don't have children. I don't read picture books. I don't think about children's literature. I wouldn't know how to do it. She said, sit down, I'm going to explain it to you. So she picks up a copy of Fancy Nancy, Oodles of Kittens, and she says it's 32 pages long, 750 words. There's a complete narrative arc. There have to be jokes for the adults and the children. If the adults don't find it funny, they're only going to read it once. So this is what it is. Give it a try. We have the same publisher. It is true that I have never thought about writing picture books, but it is also true that when I am in the middle of writing a novel, I can write anything. If I'm in the middle of the novel and you come to my house and you say, could you write a libretto for my opera? I would say yes. And if you said, could you write a piece for the nation on chemical warfare? I would say yes. Can you write a haiku? Yes. Picture book? I don't see why not. So I write all day, and after dinner I come downstairs with my computer. I'm sitting in the den with my husband, and I write a picture book, 750 words, called Buffalo in Rome. About a group of buffalo who misunderstand the song. So it's, oh, give me a home like the buffalo in Rome, where the deer and the antelope stay. So the buffalo and the deer and the antelope all move to Rome, and they live in a pension because the cowboy got the lyrics wrong and they misunderstood. The next day I send it to Robin, I send it to Harper. They love it. Fabulous. They're going to publish Buffalo in Rome. I'm so excited. Gosh, that was great. That was super. Thank you. So it was maybe 3 days later, I wrote another one after dinner. And it was good. I really had a great time. And I sent it to Robin and I sent it to Harper, and they loved it. They said, we'll give you a 2-book contract because they actually hadn't had time to write the contract for the first one yet. And they were really happy, and I was happy. It was super. It was really fun. And about a week later, I wrote another one. And, so I was in Sag Harbor this summer visiting a friend of mine, and on every corner there was a little tiny sign that said, Pony Camp. Okay? Right? Can you see it? The mom pony sewing the little pony's name into the saddle blanket, and the little ponies making lanyards and standing in line with their toothbrush. This is the life I live now. I have been infected with picture books, and every single thing I see makes me think of a picture book. And I kept writing them, and Harper said, oh, this is great. This is okay. And then they asked me to stop. And when you when you read the article that says, oh, they just found a new Dr. Seuss book, and you're thinking, oh, they did not just find a new Dr. Seuss book. That was some piece of trash that Dr. Seuss threw in his trash can, and somebody pulled it out, and now they're trying to pawn off some third-rate doc. No, you actually forget. Like, you write them and you forget because they're short and you're writing so many of them. So last March, Connor Lamb won the 17th Congressional District in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and there was a picture in the New York Times of someone holding up a piece of poster board that said, "Landslide." And I looked at my husband and I said, I've got to go upstairs for just like a minute. And because I thought everybody in America is running upstairs to write landslide, right? Because if you've got a problem, you think everybody's got the same problem. So landslide turned out to be the very first of the collaboration of Robin Price Glasser and Ann Patchett. If you look at the upper corner, that's my dog Sparky. He is on every page. And we have another one coming out in April of next year. Well, basically, we have them coming out not only for the rest of my life, but long after I'm dead. The next one, you will not even believe that no one has written this book yet. Okay, you ready? Ready? Scapegoat. So this is about a landslide is about a group of lambs who misunderstand landslide to landslide. They have to build a consensus on the farm, get the chickens and the cows and the pigs on board to see if they want a landslide, and then they vote. So it's a very, very gentle primer on voting. I went on book tour with Robin Price Glasser. I've never had such a good time in my life, because hundreds and hundreds of little kids came and not one of them had ever heard of Ann Patchett, nor did they care. They were there to see Robin, and I stood in the back with the chicken puppet and the lamb puppet, and I did the funny voices with the puppets, which it turns out I'm really good at, and I had a fantastic time. And I, since then, have really gone into the children's world whole hog, and one of my dearest friends is Sandy Boynton. Now, if you have read, as I'm sure you have, a Sandy Boynton book, don't miss this one, which is my favorite. It is the sequel to Not the Hippopotamus. It is a very tender book about an armadillo who goes his own way. So this is now July of 2018, and the book is going well, but the book is due in September of 2018, because my publisher wants to bring it out in September of 2019, and the way novels work, you hand in a year in advance. So I'm talking to Sandy, and I said, I've got to finish this book, but I keep interviewing people, I keep having house guests, I keep writing children's books, I can't focus. And Sandy says to me, listen, I've got a ski house in Utah. Nobody's there in the summer. Nobody uses it. Get on a plane tomorrow, go to Utah, stay in this house until you're finished with your book. And it's not the kind of thing I would ever do, but I was desperate, and the next day I got on a plane, I went to Utah, a state where I do not know one single person, and I went to Sandy's house, and I finished my novel. I was there for 3 weeks. It was amazing. And I came home, it was August, and my friend Patrick Ryan was there. Patrick Ryan is a fantastic short story writer. If you like short stories, I love this book. The Dutch House is actually dedicated to Patrick Ryan. And Patrick and I have something that we call Writer's Camp. That's because Patrick lives in an apartment in New York that is about 2/3 the size of this stage. And so once or twice a year, he comes to our house, he stays in the basement, he works on his book, I stay upstairs, I work on my book, we have our meals together, and we get a huge amount done, and everyone in my life respects Writer's Camp. If Patrick is there, I don't have to interview anyone, I don't have to go to lunch, I don't have to do anything, I just work. So he's downstairs writing, I'm upstairs reading my finished book, and I'm going to start my revisions, and I start reading it, and it's great, and I'm excited, but I'm reading, the book is going down and down and down, and the whole time I'm thinking about my friend Miley Malloy, because I'm thinking, one, do not become alarmed, do not become alarmed. Miley, aside from being a fantastic writer and a dear friend, is also an amazing editor. So I'm thinking if I can just get to the end of this book, I can send it to Miley and she can help me figure out how to fix it. But this book is so bad that I get 10 pages from the end and I stop reading it. Have you ever read a book so bad that you stopped 10 pages from the end? That is the hallmark of a bad book. Now imagine you wrote that book. I did not send it to Miley. I did not send it to anyone. No one saw it. I threw it away and I deleted the files. Everyone in my life said, what if you were wrong? What if it was amazing? I was like, no, I own a bookstore. I read bad books all day long. This was a bad book. My only joy was the knowledge that no one had read it. And I just, I keep saying it was like burning a cake. There's nothing you can do with a burned cake. You just have to start over again, right? You can cut it open and scrape out a little bit of the fluffy stuff and eat it over the sink, but there's not much there. So I knew it was going to be the same people, it was going to be the same house, but it had to be a different plot. I call my editor, the book is not coming in, we are not publishing in September of 2019. He says we have to, we've saved the spot, I can give you until February 1st of 2019 to hand it in. I sit down, I try to start it again. I can't, it's like I get to page 30, I hit the wall, I start again. I get to page 30, I hit the wall, I start again. Part of me is like, oh, this is really interesting. You're 55 years old. I didn't know you could still write this badly. It's so terrible. I work, I get nowhere. And then on November 2nd of 2018, Barbara Kingsolver comes to town. I interviewed Barbara Kingsolver twice. I interview her both at a lunch event and an evening event like this, and afterwards she comes home with me because most of these people do stay at our house afterwards, not Melinda Gates, not Harlan Coben. But Barbara came home with me and she said, okay, tell me your problems. And we then did something that novelists call novel therapy. Novel therapy is when one novelist tells, and you don't ask the person to read the book, you just tell them the story, and they help you talk through your problems. So I told Barbara what the book was originally, what I wanted to do, how I kept hitting the wall, and she was like, I can tell you I see your problems, like page 28, you went right, you should have gone left, the mother's not dead, the father doesn't lie, oh my gosh, something in my brain, for the first time, something in my brain goes click, click, and I see a little ray of light. The next morning I wake up, I take Barbara Kingsolver to the airport. The marketing director at Parnassus Books calls me up and says, after you drop Barbara off, could you go get some lunch for Kate DiCamillo? She's in town doing a school visit at Oak Hill. She's a huge Ann Patchett fan. It would be so polite. So I drop Barbara off, I go pick up chicken salad, I drive out to Oak Hill, I have a 30-minute lunch with Kate DiCamillo, who's on tour for Louisiana's way home. She's a lovely woman. I rush back to the bookstore because that is the night that the Nashville book is coming out. It's a book that I did with the photographer Heidi Ross. John Meacham wrote the introduction, and if you ever move to Nashville, you will buy many copies of it. The next morning, I called Donna Tartt to continue the novel therapy session. I said, this is what Barbara said. We talk on the phone for 2 hours, and again, click, click, I have figured it out. Thanks to these 2 conversations of therapy, I now know that I can do this. It is November 4th. The next day, I get an email from Nell Freudenberger, who I had interviewed, who had stayed at my house, a fantastic book about women and science, super smart novel. And Nell Freudenberger says to me, do you know Kate DiCamillo? I said, funny you should ask. I brought her some chicken salad in Oak Hill just 3 days ago. She says, okay, I don't need to talk to her, but I need you to find her and to tell her that my 7-year-old son and I finished reading The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane last night. And it gutted us, and it changed our lives. You've got to thank her for me. I finished that conversation, and I have this thought. Ann Patchett, you are such a jerk. But I am. Because I've met Kate DiCamillo twice, and I know that she has read every word I've ever written, and she loves my books, and I've never troubled myself to read anything K.T. Camillo has written, because I don't have children, and I don't read middle grade. So I get in my car, and I drive to my locally owned and operated independent bookstore. And I buy The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, and I read it that night, and it guts me, and it changes my life. And I make a decision that I am going to read every single word K.T. Camillo has ever written. I've never done this in my life. Without stop, without reading anybody else in between. I'm going to read the whole body of her work. I'm going to read the Mercy Watsons. I'm going to read the Decawood Drives. I'm going to read all of the novels. I find K.T. Camillo. We launch into this furious friendship. We email back and forth all the time. I call her Fluffy. I read all of her books. This one is my favorite. We become so close that I just wrote the introduction to the 20th anniversary edition of Because of Winn-Dixie. So now it is December of 2018, and there are 3 things going on. I'm reading nothing but K.T. Camillo. I am writing my novel, which I have completely figured out around the clock, and I am very, very sick. I have bronchitis, and I am so sick that I have to send Sparky out because I can't even walk him. But for some reason, I can sit at my desk for 16 hours a day, and that's what I'm doing. And at one point, at the end of the year, I get an email from Fluffy, as I do every day. And she says, "How's the book going?" I said, "It's going really well. I'm almost done, but I don't know how it ends." 5 minutes later, K.T. Camillo writes me back, and she says, "I got you, girlfriend. This is how it ends." She sends me a paragraph. K.T. Camillo knows 2 things about the book I'm working on. She knows the main character's name is Maeve, and she knows that it's called The Dutch House. The paragraph that she sends me is the end of the book. I had never thought that that was where the book ended, and as soon as I got that paragraph, I wrote the last 20 pages because I knew what was going to happen now, and on January 9th, I finished my novel. Now, this was very important because on January 12th, Jane Hamilton's coming. Jane Hamilton and I have a tradition. Whenever she finishes a book, she reads it out loud to me. Whenever I finish a book, I read it out loud to her. So she's driving across country. She's going to stop and spend the night. I say, "Can you stay for a few nights? I'm going to read you the new novel." She says, "Yes." For 2.5 days, I read her the book. Jane Hamilton calls me Mrs. Van Deventer because that is actually my name. I call her Mrs. Willard because that is her name. At the end of 2.5 days, Mrs. Willard says to me, "Mrs. Van Deventer, the first third of this novel is spectacular. Mrs. Van Deventer, the second third of this novel is a miracle. Mrs. Van Deventer, the third section of this novel goes off a cliff like Thelma and Louise." She explains why. You know how it is when your friend tells you the truth? You don't have to ask twice. You know the truth when you hear it. She's telling me the truth, and she is right. And I am panic-stricken. I now have just over 2 weeks. I begin to write pretty much without cease, and I send the book to Donna Tartt and to Miley Malloy and to Patrick Ryan, and I send it to Lizzie Gilbert, and I send it to Elizabeth McCracken, and I get notes from all of them, which is not a marked up manuscript. I'm talking about like a note where they say the second half of chapter 3 should be at the end of chapter 5, that kind of thing. I take all of that information, I get the last section of the book fixed, I turn it in on January 31st of this year, and my editor loves it. Now we have everything except the cover. Let me tell you something about book jackets, friends. Book jackets are like your birthday. Have any of you ever had the experience of the person you love saying to you a week or 2 before your birthday, "What do you want for your birthday? What would you like to do on your special day?" And you say, "Nothing." And when they in fact give you nothing, you go to bed hurt and bitter. Book jackets are like your birthday, because if you cannot figure out what you want, don't expect someone else to figure out what you want and surprise you with it. You've got to take responsibility. Now, I know for a fact what I don't want on the cover of this book is a house. Not a door, not a window, not a portico. The Dutch house must exist in the imagination of the reader. What I want on the cover of the book is the painting that is in the house of Maeve when she's 10. So, I say to my editor and the director of the art department, I know this guy in Nashville named Noah Satterstrom. I think that he could paint the portrait of Maeve, and we could use that on the cover. But being New Yorkers, they say to me, well, that's a really good idea. But we are going to make a list of 9 or 10 painters we're interested in, and then we're going to get some preliminary sketches from them, and then we'll have a meeting, and we'll decide, and I hang up the phone, and I think, or not. So I called Noah Satterstrom, and I said, this is what I need. I need a painting of a 10-year-old girl with black hair in a red coat, painted in 1950 in the style of 1910 by a Scotsman she's in love with. He says, got it. The interesting thing about Noah Satterstrom is to this day, he still hasn't read this book. He has 3 tiny children. He says, you got a choice. Either I can read it or I can paint it. 4 days later, the first time Fluffy D. Camillo comes to Nashville to visit without a book event, we get this painting, and I send it to New York, and they love it. I mean, I send a photograph of it. I own this painting, and it's in my living room. Now we have everything done except the audiobook. My favorite audiobook is The Testament of Mary by Colm Toibin, as read by Meryl Streep. As it turns out, I know a movie star. I emailed Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks likes baseball. I say to him, Tom, no pitches, no hits. I don't think you're going to do this, but I know for sure you're not going to do this if I don't have the nerve to ask you. There are 2 reasons I have the nerve to ask you. 1, my favorite audiobook is The Testament of Mary, read by Meryl Streep. I believe it is the greatest role of her career. 2, you were in a Carly Rae Jepsen video once. Who knows what you'll do? 5 minutes later, he wrote me back. He said, that sounds like fun. Send me the manuscript. I did. He recorded the audiobook, and that is the story of the Dutch House. Southern Festival of Books weekend, and I'm on at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So, I'm not going to stay in personalized books. I pre-sign them. They're all there, along with the adorable lamb slides. But I will answer questions. So if anybody has a question, you can come to the microphones, and you can ask the question. Or you can just, look nervous and awkward. That works, too. How did it get set in Philadelphia? An excellent question. Or you can shout it out, because really, frankly, it totally works for me. When I was in college, I was very close friends with Erica Boxbaum, who lived in Wyncote, Cheltenham, Jenkintown, Elkins Park. It's practically the same place. So I went there on the weekends because it was too far away for me to go home. She's still one of my very best friends. And I like to set a book in a place that I know but not too well. It also needed to have a reasonable proximity to New York City. And so that's it. Suburban Philadelphia turned out to be the place. Although the place that I was really thinking about in a lot of ways was the suburb of Chicago, which Evanston, home of the most beautiful houses I've ever seen in my life. Yes?
How did you decide to be the voice of the boy?
How did I decide to narrate in first person from Danny's perspective instead of Maeve? I knew what you were asking. Yes. Because, well, for one thing, first person was something I wanted to try again. I hadn't written a first person novel since 1994. And I was interested in going back. I thought first person was really easy, and I didn't want to do it anymore. I found it incredibly hard at this point. But the book is about Maeve. Maeve, when you're writing in first person, the thing you have to ask yourself is this a person who would tell her own story? No, Maeve is not that kind of person. I wanted her observed. I wanted us looking at Maeve through Danny's eyes. So that was why I picked him as the narrator. And people have also said, was it hard to write in the point of view of a man? Not at all. Danny was a snap for me. Danny is smart, successful, charming, easy in his skin, much like Harlan Coben, and completely oblivious to the fact that he has held aloft on the shoulders of the women who love him, his wife, his sister, his household staff, his daughter, and he never notices that. He thinks that he is living a golden life because he is golden. Amazingly, I have met such men in my life. And it was extremely easy for me to tap into that. And actually, if it had been someone looking at Danny, if it had been Maeve looking at Danny, it would have seemed angry about Danny. But Danny looking at Maeve, Danny's just kind of charmed, but there are moments where you think, seriously? Seriously, Danny? So that was a lot of fun to play with. Yes?
Going back to State of
Oh, you're so close to the microphone. You could just throw us a fish. Come on.
Going back to State of Wonder, which I just reread before this evening's talk. And one of the most riveting scenes in that is the anaconda.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wondered what your personal experience was.
I have a personal experience with anacondas. I'm so glad you asked. This is such a great story. So back in the days when I used to write for Gourmet, anytime I needed to do any research about anything, I would call my editor, Bill Sertle, and say, I need to go to the Amazon. I'm writing a book about the Amazon. And he was like, great, I'll send you to the Amazon. And that's how I did everything back in those golden days of expense accounts. So I was writing the piece, and we were on a boat. It was this very beautiful luxury boat that had just started. I think that there were maybe 14 rooms on the boat. And then every day they would put the guests in 2 open boats and take you on these long journeys down the Amazon. And I mean, tiny tributaries, never see another person. So in the middle of nowhere, 10 people in an open boat. And we're going down, and one of the guys in the boat, who's a guest, right? Not a guide, he's a guest. And he says, oh, look at that lettuce pond that's in sort of a little bow out in the river. I want to go in the lettuce pond. So the guide takes the boat into the lettuce pond, and this guy goes a little to the right, a little to the left. Yeah, that's right. And he sticks his hand in the water, and he's got an anaconda, but he gets the anaconda like here, and the anaconda goes straight for his face, and he drops it. Okay, that was very disturbing, all right? But it gets worse. So we go off, we're going to this place, we're sightseeing, which is bizarre. There's nothing there except more insects and plants. The Amazon is really hell. And we come back 4 hours later. Look, lo and behold, we're passing that same lettuce pond. Look, this guy says, wait, let's go back. I want to go back in there one more time, a little to the right. Turns out, anaconda just don't go anywhere. He sticks his hand back in the water. This time he gets it right here, and he pulls an 18-foot anaconda into this open boat with 10 people. All sorts of things I can tell you about snakes. One, they smell like something you can't even believe when they're frightened. Like something that a skunk never dreamed of. And this giant snake wraps around this guy whose name is Greg Greer, and he is a professional herpetologist, and he takes people on guided tours all around the world and picks up anything that will kill you and explains it. So while this anaconda is strangling him and trying to bite him, he explains, they're not fangs because there's no poison. They're teeth, and it has 3 rows of teeth. And he goes through this whole story and then pulls the anaconda. We pull the anaconda off of him. I'm not a snake phobe. But you're in an open boat, and the one thing you know is there are anaconda down there. Like, there is no place to go. So we get back. I write the article for Gourmet magazine. And I write about this whole snake story. And time goes by, they send the photographer down, they shoot the piece, they don't run it, they don't run it, they don't run it. And they paid me for it, and I call my editor, and I said, why did you never run the piece about the Amazon? And he said, did I not tell you about that, what happened? I said, no. And he said, well, you were on the first voyage of this new ship. On the second voyage, the ship was taken over by pirates armed with machetes who put the guests out on the banks in the middle of the night and set the boat on fire. So we could no longer recommend it as a tourist destination. And my first thought was, I get the anaconda back, right? Because I had written about the anaconda for Gourmet. I couldn't put it in the novel, but they killed the piece. So I put the anaconda in the novel. So glad you asked that. Thank you. Talk about forever, anacondas and mosquitoes. Yes?
Did you participate in the Red Loaf conferences?
No. No. Did I participate in Red Loaf? I know so many people who've done that. I didn't do it. And it's one of those things where you go and you make new friends. I have so many friends. The idea of going and making new ones just seems impossible. It just means that all these people that you meet are going to ask you to write them a letter of recommendation. And that's what happens at Bread Loaf. I'm sure the people are having a fabulous time there too, eating bread. Anything else? Oh, a cluster of you. Okay, you first.
Since you mentioned friends, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Truth and Beauty.
Yes. Okay, so the question is about Truth and Beauty and my friend Lucy. I'll tell you that book was so great. It's a memoir that I wrote about my best friend who died when we were 39. And it was a lovely, smart, healing thing for me to do, to write that book, which I wrote as soon as she died. But everywhere I go, people say, would you talk about Lucy? And that's really a wonderful thing. I think she was somebody who had cancer when she was 9 years old. The cancer that she had a 2% survival rate. She lived to be 39. She had a spectacular life in many ways. She had a million friends. She wrote 2 books. One of them, Autobiography of a Face, was a great book. She touched so many people. She did a really great job. And the main time that I think about Lucy now is on my birthday. There's never been anyone who was more afraid of getting old than Lucy. And at 39, she talked endlessly about how she didn't want to be 40, she didn't want to get old. 39. It's like a joke. And she died at 39. And I think every year on my birthday, like I used to think about her birthday and the day she died, now I just think on my birthday, Lucy, I'm 55, and it's great. It's so great. And I will never mind being old, because she didn't get to be old. But she did a great job with the life that she had. So thank you for asking. And then you had a question?
Yes, you spoke earlier about fear in the writing process. And I'm wondering, we all have that voice in our head that talks to us.
Yeah.
Whether we're worthy or not worthy. What does that voice tell you when you're in that process of writing a book, and how do you talk back to it?
In what context did I talk about fear?
Try to remember.
Just now? that I was afraid of being a bad step, that I was drawing from my own fears in life, not necessarily my fears about being a writer.
Right.
Here's the thing about being a writer. It's a job. My husband goes to work every day. He's a doctor. He has really hard things. He's not afraid, right? Like, people come in and they're crazy sick, or they're crazy and sick. And he might not know what's wrong with them, and he might have to talk to other people and run a lot of tests. He may never figure out what's wrong with them, but he's not afraid of it. And that's really how I feel about writing. Sometimes it's incredibly hard, and sometimes there are problems I will never solve, and sometimes I will fail. But I divide the part of my brain that is creative and the part of my brain that is critical. And I don't criticize myself until I'm finished. Because if you're critical while you're being creative, you can actually get to the point where I say you edit yourself off the page. You don't even write your thought down because you can see what's wrong with it before you even type it. So you just got to learn to shut that up and to say, I'm doing this because I enjoy it. It's a gift, it's a privilege. If it's making you miserable, don't do it. There are plenty of other things that you can do. I highly recommend Liz Gilbert's book, Opaque Magic, which is just a book about living a creative life, no matter what it is you're doing and being happy in life. There was somebody behind, yes?
You seem like as part of the writing process, you open yourself up for a lot of feedback and criticism.
Yeah.
You accept that.
Yeah.
Have you always been able to accept criticism with the same spirit?
Criticism is the greatest gift you can give somebody. All I want is for my book to be the very best possible book. If I am coming out in some horrific outfit and I ask you how I look and you say, great, you are not doing me a favor. I want to be the best writer I can be. And criticism, thoughtful criticism from people that I know and trust is an enormous gift. And in every group, there is a school teacher, an English teacher who says, I want to encourage my students' creativity, but I don't want to squash their spirit. You know, if you are a math teacher and you have a kid that says 2 + 2 is 5, and you think, girls are afraid of math, I don't want to be negative. And so you say, oh, Jenny, sometimes 2 + 2 is 5. And that's a really smart, creative answer. You're crippling that person. You're doing them an injustice. And the same thing is true with writing. We should all learn how to take criticism, and we should all want to be better and to do our best work. So, very grateful. Yes?
I don't know, you probably don't remember this, but I met you 2 years ago, and I stood up and I said, George Saunders, the New York Times author, stole my idea. What am I going to do about that? And it was getting Bardo, and I had this whole idea, it was all written
I
down.
do vaguely remember that.
And you said, thank you. And you said to me, no, he did not.
No, he did not.
You'll write something better. 2 weeks later, a better idea came. It makes a lot more sense. The whole thing's working. I'm still plotting because I don't write like you.
Yeah.
You gave me the best piece of advice.
I'm so glad. I know a woman who said to me, I was so devastated when I read Commonwealth because I was going to write a novel that opened with a party, but now I can't do it. Seriously? Yeah. Good. I'm glad you went on. Yes.
Of your books that you have thought you might do a sequel to?
No, there are no books I would do a sequel to. Nor would I write a screenplay, nor am I vaguely interested. I'll tell you, I finish a book at the point at which I feel that you, as a reader, have enough information to take it forward. It is the contract between a book and a reader. So, if you are still thinking about those characters, if you want to know what happened at Easter, that's your responsibility to figure it out. I gave you half, yes. Where I got the idea for Bel Canto was based on a true story, the takeover of the Japanese embassy in Lima, Peru in 1995. And it wasn't an opera singer, and none of those things happened, but that was the original idea. Yes? That is such an interesting question. The question is, do I ever thank he or she God for my creation? Somebody asked me that once years and years ago, and I always say, then the question people like to ask, which is, what's the one question somebody asks you that was really a stumper? And I always say, that is the one. You are now the second person to have ever asked me that question. Because what you're asking me is, do I believe in God? That's the essential question, which is a fair question. And what?
I just didn't hear you say it, and I think you're recording.
Yeah, I think it is important. It's not the kind of thing, it's really funny. It seems very personal. I'm Catholic. I went to Catholic girls' school for 12 years, and you want to know the one thing Catholics never do? We don't say this stuff out loud. It's why there are no nuns. It's why they're all dying out. Because they can't canvass. They can't go from door to door and get people to sign up. So in my heart, in my prayer, in my private life, yes. But on stage, no. Thank you. Okay, we'll do this and then we'll wrap it up and I'll go to Tennessee. Yes?
Were there any important takeaways from your time at the Iowa Writers Workshop?
Huh. Were there any important takeaways from my time in the Writers Workshop? Yes. Going to the Iowa Writers Workshop is like going to a poker game. And sometimes you're going to get dealt a good hand, and sometimes you're not going to get dealt a good hand. And the hand is the other people in your class and the teacher. When I was an undergraduate at Sarah Lawrence, I was on a hot streak like nobody's business. I studied with Alan Gerganis, Russell Banks, and Grace Paley, each for a year. It was the most astonishing education in creative writing that probably anyone's ever had. In Iowa, through no fault at all, I drew bad hands for 4 semesters. A lot of it had to do with the fact that they were in the process of hiring a new director when I was there, and they didn't have their eye on the prize. But, I learned how to teach. I had 2 years to write. It did me no harm, it did me no good. And I have nothing against the workshop because I think you could go back and get dealt 4 great hands. Think of me tonight as I am barreling towards Nashville, listening to Alan Alda podcasts. I very much appreciate you coming, and thank you for supporting your library.